She was 23 and struck off the station roll at Carduness, and on that coast there is no colder pair of words than struck off. Everything she owned went down to the shingle in one canvas kit bag. Her father's coxswain whistle on its lanyard, a sailmaker's palm and a fold of needles in an oilskin roll, and 4 shillings and 7pence in mixed copper knotted into the corner of a handkerchief. The trustees of the pilotage keep 2 lifeboat stations and want only one, and the harbour master who lets the empty one has a long memory for families that argue with him. But what none of them knew, on the day they handed her the keys and called it a shed with a bell on it, is that the fog bell loft at the top of 90 cliff steps holds a door nobody has opened since the station closed. And behind that door, the whole village's money. The frost on the shingle was still white at noon when Esther Marrow came down off the Carduness track and stopped at the foot of the cliff stair. She tipped her head back, set one hand on the strap of her satchel, and looked up 90 steps at the thing the trustees had given her. Settle in with a cup of tea and let the fire burn low, because this one takes the better part of a winter to tell. And however far the sea is from where you are sitting tonight, tell us in the comments where in the world you are listening from. It stood 3 stories of grey coarse stone on the shoulder of the cliff, and it was not a shed. The boat hall at the base carried timber double doors 2 stories high, blistered down to bare grain, their hinges bleeding orange into the stone. Above the hall ran the crew loft with 7 bays of tall windows, and above the roofline the square bell tower went up a full story more, capped with a crenellated parapet and an open louvered cote with the bell hanging dark inside it. 4 chimney stacks stood along the ridge. Half the slates were gone, and the bare rafters showed through in 2 places, and the lower courses wore bladderwrack and green weed to the height of a spring tide. She was dressed for the walk and not for the wind. Navy wool skirt to the tops of her boots, cream linen blouse with the sleeves rolled to the forearm, an oatmeal shawl pinned across her shoulders, her ginger hair up in a low bun at the nape, with 3 strands already loose in the wind. A cast-iron launching davit lay across the frosted shingle at her feet, snapped at the socket, and rusted the color of dried blood. Beyond it the old slipway ran down to the water on frost-rimed balks, and the stone stair climbed the cliff shoulder in 3 zigzag runs to the boat hall doors, its iron handrail broken away in the middle flight. 2 windows in the crew loft caught the low light and threw it back amber, and that was the only warm color anywhere on that headland. She had been born 140 yards from where she stood, in the second cottage of the Coast Guard row, in the spring of 1831. Her mother died when Esther was 9 and left her the sole woman in a house of oilskins. Her father, Thomas Marrow, took the coxswain's place at the station in the year she was 4 and kept it for 19 years, and in all that time he never once launched without her hearing the maroon go up and running for the cliff path with her boots in her hand. She learned the trade the way a child learns a language, which is by being in the room. By 11 she could serve a rope and whip an end. By 14 she had the palm on her hand and could sew a flat seam in No. 2 canvas that a Wern sailmaker would have signed. By 17 she kept the gearbook, every line, every cork jacket, every fathom of grass warp, dated in and dated out in a round hand that never once had to be corrected. The crew called her the storekeeper and meant it kindly, and none of them ever thought to ask whether the trustees wrote her name down anywhere at all. They did not. A crew roll is a list of men, and a woman who mends the gear and keeps the book is not on it, and nobody on that coast had ever needed to say so out loud, because nobody had ever needed to know. Her father died on the 14th of October, 3 weeks after a night service to a collier brig that went on the bar in a sou'wester. He came off the boat wet to the shoulders and stayed wet the whole 8 hours, and the lungs took him in his bed, quietly, with the tide going out. He was 51. Half the pilotage stood in the churchyard above the Ness, with their hats in their hands, and the harbour master read a line about the sea giving up her dead, and it snowed a little on the coffin lid, and that was the whole of it. 11 days later, a clerk came out from the pilotage office with a paper. The subscription that paid the crew also paid a small annuity to widows and to sons who took a father's oar, and the clerk read the terms in the doorway rather than come in out of the cold. There was no widow. There was no son. The name Marrow came off the roll on a single stroke of the pen, and with it went the cottage, which had never belonged to her father at all but to the trustees, and which the new second coxswain at Thornpoint would want by the 1st of the month. She did not argue in the doorway. She went to the pilotage office at Cardew Ness the next morning and stood at the counter with the gearbook under her arm and asked for the storekeeper's place at the new station, which was vacant, and which she had done in all but name for 6 years. Silas Pascoe, harbour master, did not look up from his tide tables for a while, and when he did, he smiled at her with a kind of comfortable regret. The trustees, he said, were not in the habit of putting a young woman on the books at the river mouth, where the crews slept 2 nights in 5. But there was, he allowed, the old station. It had been condemned in 1846, the year the new house opened at Thornpoint. It had a roof the trustees would not spend on, a slipway nobody had greased in 8 winters, and a stair that the surveyor's report described as unsafe in wet weather. He could license it to her from the 1st of November to Lady Day for a shilling a year, all repairs at the tenant's charge, no claim on the trustees for anything whatever. He wrote it out in a fair hand and turned the book round for her signature, and while the ink dried he told the 2 pilots waiting at the counter what he had done. "I have given Marrow's girl a shed with a bell on it," he said, "and she is welcome to both." She signed. She was 20 weeks from Lady Day, she had 4 shillings and 7pence, and she carried the key down to the shingle herself. The boat hall smelled of tar and cold stone, and the sour green smell of weed. The carriage rails ran the length of it, and out through the doors to the slipway head, and the carriage itself was gone, sold or broken up. Rain had come in through the stripped slates for 8 winters, and gone out again through the floor, and there were 3 inches of drifted sand along the seaward wall with gull bones in it. The stair to the crew loft was oak and sound. That was the first good thing. The loft ran the whole length of the building above the hall, 7 bays of windows facing the water. 4 of them boarded, and 3 of them glazed. There were 11 bunk frames with the boards taken out of 9 of them, a long deal table too big to have come up the stair, and at the north end, a cast-iron range with the fire bars gone, and a jackdaw's nest 4 feet deep in the flue. She stood in the middle of that floor, with her bag still on her shoulder, and did the sum she had been doing all week, which was not a sum about money. A woman alone in a condemned building on a cliff has one question to answer, and it is not whether she is frightened. It is what she can sell. She could not sell the building. It was not hers. She could not sell the fittings. They belonged to a trust that would prosecute. What she had was 2 hands, a palm, a fold of needles, and every canvas repair the pilot crews had been carting 11 miles inland to Werne since the old sailmaker there put his prices up. She cleared 1 bay of the loft that first afternoon, took the boards from 4 bunk frames to make a bed and a bench, and slept in her shawl under 2 of her father's oilskins, with the frost coming in white on the inside of the glass. In the morning she carried her whole kit up from the shingle, hung the whistle on a nail beside the door, and got out the needles. The first job came up the stair on the 2nd day, and it came because of the price and not because of pity. Jory Kestel, bowman of the pilot cutter and 68 years old, hauled a torn No. 2 jib up the whole cliff stair, dropped it on the deal table, and said he would give her a shilling and sixpence to make it a sail again, which was 9 pence less than Wern and 2 days quicker. She sewed it that night by a lamp she trimmed low to save oil, and Kestel had it back before the morning ebb, and he looked at the seam a long time in the doorway before he paid her. After that it was net at 3 pence the fathom, and a boat cover, and a set of trysail cringles, and a bag of light canvas from the ferry that had been waiting 6 months for somebody to care about it. By the middle of December, she was earning 8 shillings some weeks, and none at all in others, and she was warm at night, and she had glazed a 5th window with panes carried up in her satchel from a wreck sail, and she had a range that drew. What she did not have was a reason for anyone to climb the cliff. If you've made it this far into her first winter at Cardew Ness, you already know what that coast does with a woman whose name is not written anywhere. Subscribe if you would like to hear how the writing got done, and there is a new story here every second night. The reason arrived on a Tuesday in the shape of weather. A sea fret came in off the river mouth at 4 in the afternoon and shut the bar down to a white nothing, and Esther stood at the loft window and listened to the pilot cutter feeling her way in with a man in the bows swinging the lead and calling the fathoms, and she heard the cutter strike the shoal on the north lip of the bar and come off again, and she heard the language that followed it right along the moorings. The bar at Cardew Ness carried 2 fathoms at high water, and barely 1 at the ebb, and it moved twice a year. In fog there was nothing to steer by from seaward but the sound of surf on 2 different beaches, which is the least reliable thing in the world. Until 1846 there had been a bell. She had grown up with it. The station bell hung in the cote above the parapet, and in thick weather the boat crew rang it in a pattern the pilots knew. 3 strokes, a pause, then 3 more, which meant that the sound was coming from the north lip and the deep water lay south of it. Her father had rung it. Half the men on the moorings had rung it. When the trustees closed the station, they took the lower rope away with the rest of the gear, wired the tower door shut, and nailed a surveyor's board across the stairhead, and the coast went back to guessing. Kestel told her, over the deal table with a mug in his hand, exactly what the pilots thought of that. "Nobody has rung over that bar since '46, he said, "and we have all got old counting the times it would have paid." She asked him what it would be worth. He put the mug down and thought about it seriously, which she had not expected, and said that a bell rung in a fret reliably, in the pattern, was worth a penny the passage to every cutter and ferry and coasting brig that used the river, and that if she was fool enough to keep it, he was fool enough to pay first. That night she went up the cliff stair with a lantern to look at the tower door, and she counted the steps, because there was nothing else to do with her breath. 31 in the first run, 29 in the second where the handrail was gone, 30 in the last. 90 steps, hoarfrost picking out every tread edge in white, and the sea a long gray plate below her with the light going off it. The tower door was oak, wired shut with 3 turns of seizing wire twisted flat, and a board nailed across it with a surveyor's stamp. She left it that night, and came back in the morning with a marlinspike, and she took the wire off in 11 minutes without breaking a strand, because a strand of wire is worth a farthing, and she had been raised by a man who accounted for wire. Inside, the tower stair went up in a square spiral of stone, 17 steps, to a boarded floor under the louvers. 8 winters of jackdaws had made the loft a foot deep in sticks and lime, and there was 1 small square window in the seaward wall, shuttered and blind. The bell hung above her in the cote on a headstock of pitch pine, bronze, 300 weight of it, dark green with verdigris and perfectly sound. The wheel was gone. The rope was gone. The clapper was gone too, which stopped her breath in her throat, because a bell without a clapper is a sculpture. She stood under it in the lime dust with her lantern up and worked through it as her father worked through a foul warp, which is by refusing to be interested in the difficulty. A clapper is an iron ball on an iron shank with an eye at the top and a staple through the crown of the bell. The staple was still there. What she needed was a shank, an eye, a ball of iron, and a man with a forge, and there was a snapped launching davit lying on the shingle below her own stair with a 2-inch iron pin through its socket that had not held anything up since the year she was 15. She walked the 11 miles to Werne on the coldest morning of December with the pin in her satchel and a tracing of the staple on the back of a chandler's bill. The smith there heard her out, turned the pin over twice, and said he could draw a shank and upset a ball on it for 2 shillings and 3pence, and that he would want to see the bell rung before he believed a word of it. It took her 4 days to get the clapper into the coat and hung, working in the short light, and it took a 5th day to reeve the fall. A length of second-hand 3-strand she bought off the ferry for 8pence, spliced to a tail of her own laying, brought down through the loft floor and through a lignum block screwed to the tower stair wall. So the rope came out at the boat hall door, where a person standing on the ground could wring it without climbing anything at all. On the 19th of December, a fret came in on the young flood. Esther Marrow took the fall in both hands at the boat hall door, with the fog lying so thick on the shingle that she could not see the davit, and she rang 3 and a pause and 3, and went on ringing it for 40 minutes. The pilot cutter came in over the south of the bar with 2 fathoms under her, and never touched. Then the Werne ferry. Then a Whitstable oyster smack that had been standing off since noon, and had no business being there at all. By dark there were 9 men on the shingle looking up at a tower with a bell in it, and Jory Castell counted a penny out of a wet purse into her hand for each of the 2 passages he had made that day, and set it in front of all of them. "A penny the passage," he said, "and cheap at the price." She began the bell book that night, ruled in the back of her father's gear book, date, vessel, master, passages, pence. She rang for every fret and every night fog, and twice for snow. On the 4th of January, the entry read 41 passages in 1 day. By the last day of January, the column came to 240 passages and 240 pence, which is £1 exactly, and she wrote the pound down and looked at it for a long time. Because a pound is 11 weeks of a shilling a year license multiplied by something no clerk had ever bothered to calculate. She was 11 weeks short of Lady Day. The license pinned over the range said every repair fell on the tenant, and the roof over the seaward end of the loft had gone from 2 holes to 3, and a pound will not buy 1,100 slates. The gale came up on the 6th of February from the northeast, which is the wrong quarter for that coast, and the reason the bar moves. It took the loose downpipe off the gable at midnight and put it through the boat hall roof, and it worked at the stripped slates all night with a sound like a man turning over cards. At 2 in the morning, Esther heard something new above her, a knocking in the tower that was not the wind, and she took the lantern up 90 steps in her nightgown, with her father's oilskin over it and her boots unlaced. The headstock had shifted 1/4 of an inch on its bearings, and the clapper was swinging free against the crown. She wedged it with a folded scrap of leather, and she was backing out across the boarded floor with the lantern in her left hand when the board under her right heel gave way with a crack like a gun and dropped her to the thigh. She hung there in the hole with the lantern still up, and the light went down past her leg into a space that should not have been there, and showed her a whitewashed wall. It took her 20 minutes to get her leg out, and another hour to lift the boards, because they were oak and they had been laid the wrong way about, with the tongues cut off, by somebody who wanted them to come up again. Under them was a chamber 4 feet by 6, plastered and lime-washed, floored with brick, with a slate shelf along one wall at the height of a person's waist. It had been built into the thickness of the tower with the loft floor laid over it, and it was as dry as a biscuit tin, because the tower had been built by men who understood what salt air does to stores. On the shelf stood a Japan deed box, black, with a laundress's flat iron on top of it for a weight, and beside the box a stack of 18 ledgers tied in 2 bundles with tape, and a tallow candle in a tin stick with an inch of it left. She lit the candle from her lantern and sat down on the brick floor in her nightgown at 3 in the morning and untied the first bundle. The hand was small and upright and absolutely regular, the hand of a woman who had ruled her own lines. Cardew Ness Lifeboat Station, store account, and a year on the spine, 1828. Cork jackets, 4, received of the trustees. Oil, 2 gallons. Grass warp, 40 fathoms, condemned and cut up for stops. And at the foot of every quarter, a signature. Rebecca Scarrett, storekeeper. Esther knew the name the moment she read it, as a person knows a name off a churchyard wall. Scarrett the laundress. Scarrett, who had taken in the crew's wet flannels for 40 years, and had a copper in her yard and no family living, and who had died in the winter the station closed, and whose grave was 8 feet from her father's. 18 ledgers, 18 years, 1828 to 1846, every page of them ruled and totaled and carried forward, and not one correction in any of them that was not initialed and dated. There were pages Esther could have written herself. There were pages she had written herself, in another book, in another decade, in a round hand that had been taught to her by a dead man who had probably been taught it by this dead woman. She read until the candle went out, and then she read by the lantern, and what she found in the ledgers for 1839 stopped being a store account and started being a case. On the 9th of November, 1839, a collier brig had come in on the bar in the dark with a leaking pump and gone to pieces in an hour and a half with the whole village on the shingle and the boat unable to launch, because the slipway that year was silted to the knees. The parish raised a subscription afterwards. 309 people put money into it, most of whom had nothing to put, and the total came to 400 sovereigns, and it was raised by public advertisement for 2 purposes only: a new boat and a roof on the station that would keep the gear dry. The trustees bought neither. The ledgers recorded, in Rebecca Scarrett's small upright hand, every year that they did not, applied for at the Michaelmas meeting, deferred, applied for, deferred, applied for, refused, the fund being better kept whole. 9 times in 7 years, each one entered on the day it happened, with the name of the chairman who moved it. And on the last page of the last ledger, dated the 3rd week of the winter the station closed, an entry that was not a store account at all. Fund removed from the pilotage office to this store for safekeeping by the hand of the undersigned, being the treasurer thereof. 400 sovereigns in 8 rolls of 50. Counted twice. Esther got up off the brick floor and lifted the flat iron off the Japan box and opened it. 8 canvas rolls, the canvas gone the color of weak tea, each one stitched at both ends with a sailmaker's stitch she recognized because it was her own trade. Under them, flat against the bottom of the box, a folded paper sealed with a black wafer, and written across the fold in the same small upright hand, to whoever keeps the bell. She sat down again. She did not open it for a full minute, and when she did, she read it out loud in the empty loft, because there was nobody to read it to, and because it seemed to her that a letter left 8 winters in the dark had earned a voice. I am Rebecca Scarrett, laundress of this parish, and I have kept the store and the accounts of this station for 18 years. The subscription raised after the brig came to 400 sovereigns, given by 309 people, most of whom had nothing to give it with. It was raised for a boat and a roof. The trustees have refused the roof 9 times in my hearing, and they will refuse it again after I am gone. Because a fund kept whole makes a gentleman look careful, and a fund spent makes him look accountable. The wind took the loaves above her and let them go. Therefore I have put it where the trustees do not go, which is up 90 steps, and I leave it, with what right I have as treasurer, to whoever keeps the bell of this station ringing over the bar. Not to the men in the room below. Whoever keeps it shall keep a book of the ringing, and shall lay out the fund on the fabric of this house in the order the sea teaches. The counterpart lies with Tyack, attorney of Werne. There was one more line under the signature, and it was not legal at all. I was never on the roll either. R.S. Esther Marrow sat on the brick floor of a chamber nobody had entered in 8 winters, with 400 sovereigns at her knee and a dead woman's handwriting in her fist, and did not touch the money for 2 days. What she did instead was walk the 11-mile road into Werne in the sleet, with the letter buttoned inside her blouse, because a paper is worth nothing without the other half of it, and because she had read enough of Rebecca Scarrett's ledgers by then to know how the woman thought. Tyack's office was over a rope-maker's on the north side of the marketplace, and the clerk who took her name was perhaps 19, and did not want to carry a message about a lifeboat station up to a man at his dinner. She waited on the stair for 2 hours. When she was finally shown in, she put the letter on the table and said nothing at all, which is the only thing to do with a lawyer. Tyack read it twice. Then he went out of the room and came back with a boy carrying a japanned box, the twin of the one in the tower, and out of it he took a folded paper with a black wafer on it, and a docket on the back in a clerk's hand, and the docket was dated the Michaelmas of 1846. It had lain in that strong room, he told her, since before she could read. Twice a year he had asked the trustees whether they wished to inquire after the station subscription, and twice a year for 8 years they had answered that the fund was with the pilotage office, and the matter closed. He read the counterpart out to her, and it was the same document to the comma, and it carried 2 witnesses who were living. The rope-maker downstairs, and a woman in Thorn Point who had scrubbed alongside Rebecca Scarrett for 30 years. It named the condition in plain terms: the bell, rung, the book, kept and shown. The fabric of the station, in the order the sea taught. Then he set the 2 papers side by side and told her what would happen next. The trustees would say that a treasurer cannot dispose of a subscription. Somebody would then ask them in open vestry where the fund had been these 8 years, and they would have to answer that they had not seen it since 46 and had not missed it. No gentleman in that county wanted such a question asked out loud in front of 300 subscribers. They would settle. She asked him what settling would cost her. "Nothing you have got," he said. "Ring the bell." She was 5 weeks short of Lady Day when the slater came out from Werne with his boy and a cart, and the order of the work was not hers to choose, because Rebecca Scarrett had already written it, and because the sea agrees with her. Roof first. 1,100 slates, new lead in 2 valleys, 16 feet of ridge, 4 rafter ends scarfed where the wet had got in. The better part of 5 weeks with 2 men on the scaffold, and Esther on the ground taking the slates off the cart and stacking them by size, and the bill at the end of it was £48, paid in sovereigns out of a canvas roll on the deal table, counted twice, entered in the book. The range came next, because a house that cannot cook cannot hold anybody through a winter. And the jackdaw's 4 feet of sticks came down the flue in a black rush that put lime dust on everything in the loft. New fire bars, the flue relined, the oven door rehung, £6 10 shillings. The first fire drew so hard it frightened her. The slipway was last and cost the most in labour and the least in temper. £31 for Greenheart balks and a new winch drum, and 11 days of work with Kestel and 2 of the pilot crew who would not take money for it and took the tea instead. When the last roller was in, the 4 of them stood at the head of it in the cold, looking down a clean grease-black run into the water. And nobody said anything sentimental, and Esther went inside and wrote the sum in the book, £85 10 out of 400, leaving £314 10 which she did not consider hers. The bell book by then had a page for every week since the 19th of December, and a wall of its own by the boat hall door, where anyone who paid a penny could see what he had paid for. Women came up the 90 steps in 1s and 2s in February and March to look at it, which had not been part of any plan. The rope-maker's sister came. The woman from Thorn Point who had witnessed the counterpart came, and stood a long while in the tower loft, with her hand flat on the whitewash of the little chamber, and said that Rebecca had washed for that station for 40 years, and had never once been given so much as a chair to sit on in it. With 3 weeks still to run, Esther put the remaining £314 10 into Tyak's hands as a standing fund on the 2 things the letter named: the fabric and the bell, in Rebecca Scarrett's name, and not her own, with an account to be published in the vestry every Michaelmas, and open to any subscriber who asked. She kept the ledgers. She was better at ledgers than at owning things. On Lady Day a trustee's clerk came out along the cliff track, in a gig with a renewal license in his coat pocket, and found a roofed building with smoke coming out of one of 4 chimneys, and a greased slipway, and 11 bunk frames boarded, and a bell book on the wall with 2,900 passages in it since December. He read the counterpart standing up in the boat hall, and Esther watched him get to the last line and read it twice. "They will want to see the ledgers," he said at last. "They are on the table," she said. "They have been on a shelf in this building since the year I was 15. The trustees settled in April, on paper, without a meeting anybody could point to afterwards, which is how such things are done. The old station at Carduness went to her on a lease of 99 years at £1 a year, all repairs at the tenant's charge, which she had been paying anyway, and the bell was entered in the pilotage list as a fog signal maintained by private subscription, which meant that the pattern she rang became the pattern the charts printed. Silas Pascoe never came. Not in November when he licensed her a roof he expected to fall in. Not in February when the Slater's cart went past his window 4 times. Not on Lady Day. Not in April. He sent the clerk, and the clerk sent a letter, and the letter was signed by a hand that had written her father off a roll with 1 stroke. In the whole of that winter the Harbour Master of the Carduness pilotage did not once climb the 90 steps to look at what he had given away, and that, in the end, was the only revenge she got, and the only one she wanted. There was fog on the last morning of April, a soft white fret coming up the river mouth on the young flood with the sun already burning holes in it. Esther Merrow came out of the boat hall door in a navy skirt and a cream blouse with the sleeves rolled, took the fall in both hands, and rang 3 and a pause and 3, and kept ringing while the pilot cutter came over the south of the bar with Jory Kestel in the bows and 2 fathoms under her keel. When it cleared, she went up the cliff stair to wedge the headstock, because the bell she had made a clapper for was 300 weight of bronze, and it moved a little every time it spoke. 90 steps, 31, 29, 30. At the top she stopped, as she always stopped, and put her hand flat on the whitewash of a chamber 4 feet by 6, where a laundress had kept a village's money dry for 8 winters, rather than watch it be kept whole. Nobody else ever climbed those steps to see it. They did not have to. The bell was audible for 4 miles in thick weather, and every soul on that coast heard the answer twice a week all summer without once being told what the question had been. So here is the thing worth turning over tonight. On whatever coast or plain or city you are listening from, would you have gone up 90 frozen steps in the dark on the word of an old man with a torn jib and no promise of anything at the top of them? Or would you have taken the ferry money in November and gone inland where the winters are kinder and nobody wires a door shut against you? One of those is safer. Only one of them ever gets your name written down